These criminals just couldn't wait to steal from innocent people. Let's get right to it, starting with number 6, a model scam. Fashion model Annie Dutt stole credit card information and ripped off a bunch of chemist warehouses, an Australian discount pharmacy chain. Dutt, whose family fled war-torn South Sudan when he was 3, was scouted while hanging out with friends at a hotel in Sydney. By 2016, Dutt was signed with the prestigious Chadwick Models Agency. Dubbed South Sudan's 3rd most handsome man alive, Dutt worked for some of the world's biggest designers, such as Tommy Hilfiger, Camilla and Marc, and Jack London. Even though he was pretty successful, Dutt apparently felt like he needed a side hustle. Being paid to be good looking just wasn't enough. So he bought stolen credit card information from illegal websites that acted like a marketplace for people wanting to commit fraud. Once Dutt had the card information, he went on shopping sprees at various chemist warehouses locations in Sydney. After buying a bunch of whatever you'd buy at a discount pharmacy, off-brand desktop fans and cheap makeup probably, Dutt returned to the items and requested that the refunds go to his personal bank account rather than back onto the card. When Chemist Warehouse and Dutt's victims eventually figured out they were being scammed, they contacted law enforcement. Investigators found security camera footage of Dutt making the purchases and arrested him. Police seized Dutt's cell phone where he had a tab open for ccvstore.net, a website that sells credit card information, including the numbers, expiration dates, and CVV numbers. They also uncovered that he shared at least 6 of the 19 card numbers he'd acquired with a third party. But buying and selling credit cards from the dark web was far from the only crime he committed. In 2013, Dutt was convicted of assault. Then, in 2016, his license was suspended for driving under the influence. He temporarily lost the ability to drive again in 2020 after getting behind the wheel with that suspended license. And around the same time he was scamming Chemist Warehouse, Dutt was also accused of throwing a glass bottle at Janea Capablanca, the mother of their young daughter. Police were sent to Dutt's apartment late at night when 2 men were fighting in the street. Officers found Dutt with his shirt ripped open, and not in a hot model kind of way, but in a fighty kind of way. And Oliver DeVerge, Janea's godfather, who was bleeding profusely from a gash on his forehead. The fight started when DeVerge was at dinner with Janea's mom when she got a phone call from her daughter because Dutt had thrown the bottle at her. So the pair rushed into a taxi to go pick up Janea and the baby, but were greeted by Dutt once they arrived. Dutt was acting belligerent, shoved Janea's mom out of the way, and began to pummel DeVerge, leaving a scar on his forehead. Dutt claimed to not have started the fight, but has since pleaded guilty to the charge. For his credit card fraud, Dutt was remorseful in court and told reporters that he already paid back the money he stole and apologized to his victims. He was charged with multiple counts of dealing with identity information to commit an indictable offense. Sounds like he wasn't exactly a model citizen. Number 5. She'll be back soon. Donald Felix Zampach posed as his deceased mother for over 30 years after she passed, so he could receive her Social Security payments and veteran benefits. Zampach's mother had passed away in 1990 in Japan, but rather than report her passing, he decided to assume his mother's identity. He forged her signature on benefit eligibility certificates, filed fraudulent federal income tax returns, and even maintained her bank accounts. Zampach also racked up credit card debts in her name. Zampach received roughly $830,000 of his mother's widow's pension from the Social Security Administration and an annuity from the Department of Defense Finance Accounting Service. The Department of Justice eventually grew suspicious of Zampach. When they questioned him, he attempted to convince investigators that his mother was still alive. Before his mother passed, Zampach had transferred her home to his name without her knowledge and used some of the money to pay off the mortgage on the San Diego house. Zampach also filed for bankruptcy, but didn't disclose that he owned the home. He also opened at least 9 credit cards in his mother's name and racked up more than $28,000 in debt. Zampach claimed to be very remorseful during his trial, which seems like a good place to show remorse, and accepted full responsibility for what he did. U.S. Attorney Randy Grossman said that his fraud was one of the district's longest running and largest of its kind, so whether or not the remorse was real is up for debate. Zampach was found guilty of money laundering and Social Security fraud. He faced 20 years in prison and a $500,000 fine for money laundering, and an additional 5 years in prison and a $250,000 fine for Social Security fraud. He also had to give back his mother's former property as restitution. The story would have been a lot more fun if he'd been dressing up like his mom too, in a sort of lighthearted psycho. Like a Weekend at Bernie's thing. Think of the hijinks. Number 4. The House. always wins. Accountant Ben Carter defrauded clients out of millions of dollars to fund his gambling problem. Carter was the money man behind Australian beer brand Drink West, co-owned by rugby star Nathan Clary and UFC fighter Tai Tuivasa. Carter's Sydney-based firm, Carter's Tax Advisory, rose to prominence during the COVID-19 pandemic. During that time, it won multiple local business awards, starred in local newspaper ads, and developed a solid social media presence. The company had even partnered with well-known establishments and organizations like the rugby team Penrith Panthers. In late 2009, the firm released a promotional video of Carter shaking hands with one of the team's executives. Carter's Tax Advisory promised to provide players and staff with financial advice. But rather than make elaborate purchases or fund a lavish lifestyle, Carter just dumped all the money into gambling. Almost all the cash went into his sports bet account, but not even the stolen money was enough to fund his gambling. Carter also added some of his salary, business funds, dividends, and loans to keep gambling. So he had to figure out how to get more. So Carter told many of his clients that they owed money in their taxes when they didn't. He also made his victims believe they wouldn't receive tax refunds so he could steal them without anyone noticing. Australia's Tax Practitioners Board opened an investigation into Carter's Tax Advisory after receiving reports of alleged fraud. After searching Carter's home and business, investigators uncovered massive amounts of evidence against him. So much that Carter just ended up admitting to some of the allegations. Investigators seized hard drives, documents, electronic devices, and a small amount of, let's just call it, nose beers. Court documents revealed that when Carter was chief financial officer for Drink West, he offered to buy $440,000 on behalf of an investor. But rather than invest it, Carter just kept the money. His girlfriend and office assistant, Amy Steele, attempted to help him cover his crimes, so she was arrested alongside Carter. A court had already convicted Carter of fraud in 2008 after he used his job as a bank teller to steal $30,000. Carter had potential connections with organized crime associations, so the court refused his bail over fears that members would help him flee overseas. Sportsbet also allegedly incentivized Carter's behavior by offering to match dollar for dollar any proceeds that he gambled. Despite concerns over Carter's ability to legally fund his gambling problem, Sportsbet gave him corporate box tickets, flew him to gambling events, and paid for his accommodation. Carter sued the gambling organization for ignoring the concerning behaviors he was exhibiting when they reviewed him in 2021 and 2022. He was charged with 14 counts of dishonestly obtaining a financial advantage by deception, knowingly dealing with the proceeds of a crime, and possessing a prohibited substance. Steele, his girlfriend, was charged with dealing with the proceeds of a crime. Did Sportsbet do anything wrong in this scenario? Is it their job to make sure people aren't gambling too much? Or do they have a responsibility to manage their platform simply because gambling problems can lead to criminal behavior? Number 3. Trust me, I'm a celebrity. Alicia Newby stole several people's identities, including Empire actress Taraji P. Henson, and went on a modest spending spree. Newby hacked the Oscar and Emmy-nominated actress's email account, which she then raided for personal information, like financial account data, phone numbers, and addresses. Newby made $12,000 in fraudulent transactions throughout her scam, although Henson's manager was able to recover $4,000. Newby also defrauded American Express, PayPal, JP Morgan Chase, and other companies in her scam, along with several other victims. Henson's manager noticed fraudulent charges on several of her accounts, which included online purchases with shipping addresses and names that the actress and her team didn't recognize. So, authorities conducted an almost year-long investigation before serving Newby a search warrant for her apartment. Investigators found items purchased in the scheme and seized several electronic devices. A few months before she was caught, a postal worker refused to deliver a package as she believed the shipping address had been used in an ID theft scam. Newby allegedly went after the worker, demanding she hand over the packages. She didn't want to get ripped off, you know. Police officers arrived at the scene, and their body cameras caught Newby's demands. She eventually received the packages after causing a scene at her local post office. Law enforcement lost track of Newby shortly after the incident when she moved out of her apartment, leaving thousands of dollars in damages and $4,000 in unpaid rent. Months later, she pawned a designer handbag using her actual ID, which was like a big giant spotlight for authorities. Newbie was charged with one felony count of continuing a financial enterprise. They investigated Newbie for a year over stealing $12,000 from a rich person who probably didn't even notice. Look, we're not saying what she did was okay, but that's barely out of small claims court, and the investigation probably cost twice that. If you're having any sort of legal issue, our advice is just to be rich. You'd be surprised how much it helps. Number 2. Scam-chanic. A New York auto repair business owner, Ibrahim Tony Issa, got rich by running a postal truck repair scam. The owner of First Star Auto Repair had offices in the Bronx and shops in Florida, Texas, and Michigan. Sounds like he's Mr. Worldwide. In exchange for access to work repairing and maintaining the organization's fleet of postal service vehicles, Issa bribed USPS vehicle managers with vacations, fancy dinners, and gifts. Issa's team worked on the USPS trucks and returned them with shoddy repairs or no repairs at all. He made $30 million in 1 year, having billed the USPS for work that was either unnecessary or incomplete. Which is such a cliche mechanic thing to do though, right? Way to propagate mechanic stereotypes, Tony. Additionally, Issa conspired with others to evade paying federal income taxes for his businesses by misreporting expenses and income to the IRS. He signed false personal tax income reports and failed to pay hundreds of thousands in taxes. The Office of the Inspector General received complaints about Issa's shoddy work, so a couple vehicle managers had to go undercover to get him. But Issa was unaware and treated the undercover agents like he did all his accomplices. He took them out to extravagant dinners and bought them fancy gifts. He appeared before Manhattan federal court where he received 60 months in prison. Issa was also sentenced to 3 years of supervised release in order to pay the IRS $557,176 in restitution. What if they made a movie about the undercover guy dealing with Issa, but it's treated like he's working with the mafia or something? Like, there could be a scene where the wife is crying because the guy is in too deep with Issa, and it's like she doesn't even know him anymore as he slowly gets drawn into the seedy underworld of shoddy USPS truck repair. We're not saying we've already got a draft nearly complete, or that it's something that would pretty much guarantee Michael Keaton, Amy Adams, and Tom Hardy the Oscars they should have had by now. Just saying. If you're enjoying this video, be sure to stay right here for our past release on even more heartless criminals. Number 1. TSA means taking stuff again? Former TSA officer Pitius Brown stole over $800,000 of items from luggage and security checkpoints over 4 years. Brown worked at Newark Liberty International Airport and admitted that his job made it extremely easy for him to steal. Despite the TSA's zero-tolerance policy for theft, the agency still fired almost 400 officers for stealing from passengers between 2003 and 2012. Although there were overhead surveillance cameras over the ticket counters to prevent thefts, they weren't always turned on. Brown typically worked alone and knew when the cameras weren't working. He also learned how to read X-ray scans to look for valuable items to steal: cameras, laptops, and other electronics. At the end of each shift, Brown would leave the checkpoint with the day's stolen goods and put them on eBay to sell. When he was arrested, Brown had 80 cameras for sale on his page, as well as video games and computers. After serving time for his 4-year stealing spree, Brown went public with his operation and warned people that the TSA locks sold for luggage don't work. Apparently, TSA employees know how to pick them without detection. Really though, does anyone use those things thinking they're going to stop anyone that's not a toddler? Some guy's like, click, now my stuff is secure. If that was you, we're sorry, but don't rely on those things. They look like what you get out of those quarter machines or something. Brown blamed his actions on how the agency treated him as an employee. The low pay and poor morale made it too tempting and easy to steal. In July of 2023, 3 other TSA officers were arrested. Elizabeth Fuster, Labarius Williams, and Joshua Gonzalez worked at Miami International Airport. Surveillance footage captured the trio attempting to distract passengers during screenings to steal items from their luggage. Gonzalez and Fuster confessed to repeatedly stealing from travelers, taking an average of $1,000 a day. Footage also caught Williams and Gonzalez taking $600 from a passenger's wallet during the screening process. Many believe the TSA's lack of training and minimal experience requirements were the the reasons for the issues. While transportation security officers are one of the last layers of protection against someone taking weapons or explosives on a plane, the requirements for the position are minimal. Transportation security officers only need a high school diploma or 1 year's experience as an X-ray technician, security industry professional, or aviation screener. Once they pass their substance screenings, background checks, and medical evaluations, they're on the front lines, screening 2.2 million passengers every day nationwide. The TSA released a statement about its no-tolerance policy for workplace misconduct, and that arrests such as those of Brown, Gonzalez, Fuster, and Williams were rare occurrences. It doesn't sound like the thefts are rare, though, does it? The agency also said that it performs screenings as required by the Aviation Security and Transportation Act. It recommended that flyers empty their pockets and place all valuables in carry-on bags. Why? So they don't have to look for your wallet? Whenever a company says they're doing the required this or that, it always comes off as really disingenuous, though, doesn't it? Like they're screening employees because they have to, but they're put out about it. Brown said that there were so few anti-theft protocols in place that he left the checkpoint one day with a Nintendo Wii in hand. Public safety officials, however, have raised concerns about the fact that people who should be concentrating on travelers' safety are distracted by the prospect of stealing, which also feels really disingenuous. Oh, so you guys think that they should be doing their jobs instead of stealing? That's your big statement? These are some of the saddest and most heartless scams out there. Let's get started with number 6, the Heartless Pastor. Pauline Bryce and her epileptic son had their life savings stolen by Gary and Jamal Soufrant, who posed as pastors selling some land. Gary and his son convinced the 71-year-old Pauline that they had land in Plantation, Florida, and told Pauline to put down $20,000 to get a contract for it. Pauline saw this as an opportunity to get some needed security for her and her son, so she scraped it together, handing over her entire life savings. Pauline had no idea that the pastor who contacted her had been involved in a multi-million-dollar scam of $7 million with his wife. After serving time for this, Gary was back to scam her of her entire life savings while posing as a pastor. At the time, Pauline hadn't seen her own son in weeks and was concerned about him living on the street. The property and plantation would give them both a safe place to stay and ease her stress. Pauline called the police when she realized that she'd been scammed, and they quickly found and arrested Gary. Police were initially unable to find Gary's son and co-conspirator, but Jamal ended up turning himself in a day later. Pauline was happy both men were caught, but was obviously hurt by Jamal, who had once called her grandma and couldn't understand why he'd do this to her. Though both men have been arrested, it's unlikely Pauline will ever see her money again. Number 5, the Heartless Realtor. Richard Troy McConaughey had been homeless for more than a year in San Fernando, having only a picture of his driver's license as a means of identification. One day, Troy received an inheritance check of $73,000 from his grandfather's estate. Planning to turn his life around and get himself off of the street, Troy was excited to cash the check. Troy had attempted to open a bank account on many occasions so he could cash the check, but the lack of any solid proof of identification made it impossible. So he carried the life-changing money for months, hoping to somehow figure out how to get it. Then, Troy met a real estate agent named Allison Renaro, who claimed to be able to help solve his problems by suggesting they open a joint bank account. Since Troy had no other options, thought he might as well give it a shot. So, Renaro got him cleaned up, and in a new set of clothes, they marched into the bank with him. As soon as the money was in the joint account, however, Renaro drained it and left at her first opportunity. Troy had planned to make the most of his second chance. He wanted to get clean by going to rehab and buy an RV so he could get himself off the streets. But all his plans were quickly deflated. McConaughey was fairly well known by residents in the neighborhood he frequented. Gary O'Neill, one of Troy's friends, warned him about Renaro after having met her, expressing that he got a bad vibe. It was also known in the community that Troy was getting a check because he talks a lot, and he'd been warned multiple times. Renaro quit her job while using Troy's money to fund her life. She refused any contact with him, as well as refusing to comment to any reporters, but neighbors have said she's living off the money she drained from the homeless guy. Troy filed a police report, and charges have been filed, but there's been very little movement on the case. Eric Ramsey, Troy's friend, heard what happened to him and started a GoFundMe account. Eric said that he couldn't just watch Troy suffer like that, and something had to be done about it. Now, with more than 600 donors, he has raised about $18,000. Number 4. The Heartless Romance. Cindy Tsai, a Chinese lawyer living in Massachusetts, was diagnosed with gastric cancer not long after getting divorced from her husband of 16 years. Divorce is hard enough in the best of circumstances, but it's even worse when dealing with cancer at the same time. Cindy's ex-husband didn't even show up to support her after her diagnosis or during her first round of chemotherapy, which had the cancer in remission in January of 2021. Unfortunately, in September of the same year, gastric cancer came back and was terminal. Jimmy first texted Cindy in early October 2021, pretending to be looking for Linda, a woman he met at the pet store. Cindy cleared up the misunderstanding, but the two continued talking after learning of their shared Chinese heritage. The relationship blossomed with playful picture exchanges of everything to the food they were eating to goofy selfies. Cindy had found a much-needed companion during her most difficult times, relying on a comfort that couldn't have come at a better time. Cindy was typically a very cautious person, but found herself one of the over 400 victims of romance scams in Massachusetts in 2021. Cindy, at her lowest point, received attention from Jimmy and quickly fell into his trap. Luring her with attention and care, Jimmy pretended to be concerned about her everyday activities and cancer treatment. In the first 10 days of their communications, Cindy was love-bombed by Jimmy, who appeared to be everything she needed, which at that time was endless emotional support. After those 10 days, Jimmy turned the conversation towards money. Jimmy talked about how he moved to the United States and how his family was into the clothing industry in Los Angeles. He also talked about how the pandemic had forced them to close shop. Later, Jimmy moved on to talk about his profession, which was crypto trading, which he said was incredibly successful and compared to Cindy's previous foray into the market of buying and selling real estate. Cindy was hesitant, but Jimmy offered appealing screenshots of his crypto returns. He knew Cindy was also reading about people like Twitter co-founder Jack Dorsey and billionaire Elon Musk, who were heavily invested in crypto, so her hesitancy began to dissipate. Jimmy then showed her an online trading market, which was really just a fake site with a similar name and appearance of a legitimate site. Cindy could pull money back out in the early days just to convince her everything was on the up and up. Jimmy even agreed to a video chat, which Cindy said helped calm her suspicions over apparent red flags. But in the end, Jimmy's confidence tricks made it appear that he was helping her become a crypto success by providing loans into the pretend platform, and it cost her $2.5 million. Sadly, because the scammers operate outside the US, Cindy was told not to expect to ever see her money again. Number 3. Cant Buy Me Love. A grandmother, known only as Susie, was relentless in her quest for love. She was so desperate that she managed to get in relationships with 3 men who ended up stealing more than her heart, over 206,000 pounds more, and her house. To Susie, men aren't all they're cracked up to be. Susie first met David, who claimed to be from the UK, with whom she ended up in a relationship. She gave David access to her bank account after he said he needed to buy a laptop. Susie was shocked to find that 42,000 pounds of her father's money had disappeared, along with David. After her first loss, Susie refused to give up on love and went on to have conversations with Johnson Williams. John claimed that he was an American soldier at the war front against the Taliban. John continually pestered Susie with requests for money, so much so that she ended up selling her house to get it to him. She became suspicious when she noticed that her money was being wired to Ghana. Susie had sent Johnson roughly 167,000 pounds. Susie, ever the optimist, was still willing to try for love one last time when she met a Ugandan, Godfrey Kizungo, via Facebook. The two got married in Africa and are still married, but Kizungo had been pestering her constantly for money and Australian citizenship. Susie grew tired of his demands and plans to annul the marriage. In the end, Susie was left with 3 failed relationships, a drained bank account, and no home. She admits that in her longing for a companion, she was desperately trying to buy love and was perhaps a little brainwashed. Number 2. Beta for life. Susan Perry, who was 73 at the time, got into a conversation with a young stranger on Facebook in a bid to search for a boyfriend. Susan had become dissatisfied with her marriage and had gone on a little Facebook adventure in her search for spontaneity that was more than she bargained for. After seeing the younger man's handsome profile picture, Susan was interested in the con man's invitation to chat. Gideon said he had a 14-year-old son named Paul and began feeding Susan various lies about his son's car accidents, subsequent hospital bills, and boarding school tuition in Dubai. Susan was drawn in by Gideon's daily sweet messages and his nice-sounding French accent. She would talk with him for hours on end and called him when her husband wasn't around. Susan loved that Gideon was so genuinely interested in her life. Gideon loved hearing about her hobbies and told Susan he worked on an oil rig, causing him to be away from Paul, who he dearly missed. When Paul was home from the rig, Paul was often at boarding school in Dubai, leaving Gideon alone and lonely. Susan never hid the fact that she was married, but had sympathy for Gideon. She never revealed her chats with Gideon to her husband because she felt that she wasn't doing anything wrong. However, Susan was so drawn in that she would send online boyfriend money whenever he needed it, starting with £400, which quickly ballooned to £40,000. The first lie fed to Susan was that Gideon's son had been seriously injured in a hit and run and needed help to fund his life-saving surgery. Quickly, Susan loaned out her life savings with assurances of repayment and even pawned her gemstone jewelry when she overdrafted. To continue to build her confidence, Gideon had offered Susan half of his paycheck, which she rejected, feeling it would be wrong to accept the money at that point. One day, Gideon told Susan his rig had been attacked by pirates and he needed £14,000 to get a helicopter to come rescue his men. Worried, Susan sent him the money and waited in anticipation for word on if everyone was okay, and was relieved to find out they were. Gideon kept appreciating her and called her an angel while promising to pay back everything at the end of his work at the oil rig. Susan had maxed out her credit card to pay for Gideon's son's operation from the hit and run and was relieved when she got a message saying Paul had recovered. Gideon next messaged her that he had been paid and would transfer what he owed the next day. This was good news since Susan had many sleepless nights stressing about how she was going to pay off her card. Susan was crushed the next morning when she received a phone call from Gideon's son. His dad had a heart attack and died. Susan was devastated, feeling like she'd lost the love of her life. After coming clean about the ordeal to her husband and daughter, Susan came to the realization that she had been scammed. Susan made a police report, and after an investigation, said there was no trace of any such Gideon or Paul. Gordon, Susan's husband, said he had suspected that things were falling apart and that he was hurt, but took responsibility for not giving his wife the attention she needed. He said he didn't blame her for falling for the con since these guys knew what they were doing. Susan has since paid off her £7,000 credit card loans and bought back her jewelry. She still owes around £15,000 that's going to take more of their golden years to pay off. Number 1. The Heart. TikToker Stephanie Thacker has lived in her car with her dog Millie for nearly a year. She often dropped videos of life in the car with her dog as she searched for a place to rent on Facebook. Thacker's followers were with her every day for months while she toiled away working for DoorDash until she saved enough money to get a place she could afford. Eventually, Stephanie found a place on Facebook and excitedly contacted the owner. The new potential landlord agreed to the place to her and sent Stephanie a legitimate-looking contract. Stephanie sent her entire life savings of over $2,000 as first month's rent and deposit to the landlord using Chime. Once the funds had been received, the landlord disappeared, leaving Stephanie broke. Stephanie showed up at the listing anyway with some hope, but discovered that the property was already rented out. With no place to go, Stephanie camped in her car at the address and called the police to get help. When the police arrived, they told her that it would be a year before she could get her money back. Stephanie quickly reported the case to Chime, with her followers calling the bank app out on social media. Chime's official page responded, saying that they saw cases like this as serious and would investigate. When Chime completed their investigation and found no faults with the transactions, they refused to return Stephanie's money despite screenshots. Her followers were moved by the story and tried to comfort her while telling her to get a new bank, even going as far as reprimanding Chime. As people were comforting her on her page, there was no shortage of comments chiding her for making online transactions with a stranger. There's an entire Reddit forum claiming that Stephanie Thacker is a scammer making up stories to get people to donate money. The Reddit users claim to have evidence that she's not homeless, that she used all the money she received on GoFundMe to buy clothes, and she's continuing to scam good-hearted people online. One user even posted a conversation with Thacker's dad explaining that she's living with a deadbeat boyfriend, that she does have a place to stay, but that the boyfriend isn't welcome. The most recent update appears to show her living in an apartment with her boyfriend and her playing the victim. It's heartless to steal from someone who's homeless. It's even more heartless to scam people who want to help. Chime may have been right. Click to watch one of these next videos. Let us know in the comments section whether or not you've had something stolen before by the TSA.